Thank you for joining us on At Issue. We welcome you for a discussion about renewable energy. Illinois is at the center of that because we have the 5th largest capacity for power, wind power, in the country. The 5th largest, and maybe we'll move that up to 4 or 3 here after this discussion. But we're going to be talking about solar. We'll talk a little bit about geothermal, things of that nature, because we have guests from the Center for Renewable Energy at Illinois State University. Let me introduce them. Matt Alderman is here. Matt is the Senior Energy Analyst at the ISU Center for Renewable Energy. And Matt, you're a former GE employee. So what was your expertise that brought you to the center?
Well, I had come from the state of Washington and found a job posting. I knew I wanted to work in the renewable energy field. I was looking at wind, solar, other opportunities, and there were a number of wind farms that were being built in the area at the time, and applied for a job with GE for several central Illinois wind farms, and that's what brought me to the state of Illinois and central Illinois.
And joining us also is Dr. David Loomis. Dr. Loomis is the director of the ISU Center for Renewable Energy, and you also worked in the private sector before coming to education.
That's right. I worked for Bell Atlantic for 11 years before coming to ISU.
And what was it about Bell Atlantic that led to sustainability?
Well, they were starting a brand new program in regulatory economics, and they were looking for somebody with a telecommunications background. So I came here, but then ever since I came to Illinois State University, actually in 1996 and 97, we were restructuring electricity markets, and I've done really shifted my focus from telecommunications all to energy economics and energy policy.
We'll talk about that in just a moment after we introduce Dr. Jin Zhou. Dr. Zhou, thank you for joining us. You are the Associate Director at the Center, but I find it most unique because you are the first PhD in this country with a degree in sustainability. How did that come about?
That's correct. The Arizona State University is the one who initiated the sustainability program for the first time in the U.S. I started the program for the first time, and then I finished my degree for the first time through the program. So I happen to be the first PhD in sustainability. I also coordinate the renewable energy program at ISU.
Okay, and let's talk about. I mentioned at the top of the show wind energy. We're the 5th largest wind power capacity. What does that mean?
Of all the states, the largest wind state is Texas by far. The largest number of wind turbines and capacity for wind energy is in Texas. And we used to be the 4th largest wind state here in Illinois, but we got beat out, I believe, by Oklahoma, so we're number 5.
Is there something holding us back?
Well, we haven't built a new wind farm here in the last 2 years, 2012, 2013. There's 2 under construction currently in Illinois, and quite a number that are undergoing the permitting process right now. So we think that kind of our dry spell is over, and we're going to see a lot more wind farms built in Illinois.
And Matt, you helped build or design a couple of those wind farms. Grand Ridge was one of them?
Grand Ridge and the Rail Splitter Wind Farm near Peoria. Yeah, there's when you're building and operating a wind farm, there's actually a dedicated crew to construction of the wind farm, and then they kind of hand it over after construction is complete to the operation and maintenance crew. And I was part of the operations and maintenance crew on those wind farms.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the, before we talk about the benefits, but let's talk about some of the problems. I know that the initial concern with some people was bird kill. Has that been resolved yet?
There are environmental studies that take place before every single wind farm construction. In fact, it's every major construction project is going to have an environmental study done. So birds are certainly one thing that is looked at before the construction of a wind farm. You know, if they find through the environmental study that it's in the flight path of an endangered migratory species, that's something they're certainly going to have to look at and resolve before construction can continue. So there's that aspect of it. There are certain areas where birds are a larger concern. You know, in California, there are some concerns with raptors and birds of that nature. It's not as much of a concern in Illinois. There aren't quite as many endangered species that are right in the path of some of the wind farms, and the overall bird kill numbers just haven't really been that great for major concern in Illinois.
But how about other animals, bats, for instance?
Bats actually tend to be a larger concern than birds, actually. Birds tend to reproduce more quickly than bats, and wind turbines do have the potential to kill bats. That's an area of ongoing research. There are a lot of organizations that are looking at bats and the potential for wind farms to impact bat populations across the U.S. There are a number of different strategies that are being looked at to mitigate and minimize bat fatalities. One of the most effective is that studies have looked at when bats are most active, when they're likely to be flying throughout a wind farm. Bats are actually most active during low wind speeds. And so one of the most common techniques is just to raise what's called the cut-in speed of a wind turbine to a little bit higher than it would be normally. And that has proven to be very effective at minimizing the number of bat fatalities. It's not a major detriment to the wind farm because, of course, it generates more electricity at high wind speeds. So if you raise the cut-in speed so the wind turbine doesn't start producing until a little bit higher wind speed, it has some impact on the amount of electricity produced. But it has quite a large impact on the bat fatalities, negative impact.
Cut-in speed is when the actual blades start to rotate.
That's correct. Yeah.
And the one other issue, in talking to the people down at the Lincoln National Weather Service, they've actually carved out a piece of the radar, and they don't even look at it anymore for bad storms because they're getting false returns from these wind farms. Has that been resolved in any way?
I know that's an area of ongoing research. That's not exactly my area. I'm not exactly sure what they've been doing. I know, one thing that I've read is that you can more or less know the speed of the blades. A lot of them are variable speed, but they operate within a certain window. So you can kind of, you know to within a reasonable extent the velocity of the blades. So if you can exclude an object with that velocity, that could be one potential way of avoiding that conflict.
So when we talk about Illinois having the fifth most capacity, Illinois really has that much wind, that steady wind that benefits, that would be beneficial for having wind farms?
Wind is such an intermittent source. So like the variables out there, so that we're not going to get the constant the wind speed throughout the year. But that what we do before we install wind turbine, we're going to evaluate the wind speed throughout the year. So we're going to gather the data set for a couple of years, and then we will determine whether it is going to be cost effective to install the wind turbine.
And going along with that, it's not just the wind speed that you have, but you need available transmission capacity to get the electricity to market, and you need an available market, a purchaser of that wind electricity. And Illinois is a net exporter of electricity to the tune of about 20% of the electricity that's produced in the state gets consumed outside the state. And so we're kind of at a sweet spot because we take a lot of that to the east of us, and so some of the better wind speeds to the west of us don't have available transmission capacity, so it makes Illinois very economical to build a wind farm right here.
Then that brings us to the question of the grid. Maybe we should talk about the grid before we go any further with sustainable sources of energy. There are 4 grids, correct me if I'm wrong, there are 4 grids in America: Texas, East, West, and then there's something called MISO in the middle part of the country. So how does energy from a wind farm get on the grid, and where does it all get mixed into one great big pot?
It does. From a very non-technical standpoint, electricity is going to flow according to the path of least resistance. You can think about it like water running through different channels and into that river. It's going to run along that path of least resistance. So once it goes onto this interconnected grid, you can't tell whether that's a wind electron or whether that's a natural gas electron that was produced by what fuel type. It's just going to go out onto the grid, and it's going to travel according to the path of least resistance.
So, and people will be familiar who are on the Ameren, Illinois system. Facts on Energy comes with your bill, and they have a little pie chart that shows that coal is 60% of their power comes from coal-powered plants. Hydro is 1%. Oil-fired is 1%. And then we have wind power, which is growing. It's up to 6% now. But if it all goes thrown into the same pot, how do we know that 6% came from wind power?
Yeah, well,
and I ask this because we're going to talk about the request for cities that under aggregate. So.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, and there really is no way to tell except that the transmission company, so the Midwest Independent System Operator, or Mid-Continent now, they just changed their name.
Oh, it's not MISO anymore.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Well, they still take the acronym, but they've called it Mid-Continent since some of their recent changes. And then in Northern Illinois, it's the PJM system, which is the transmission owner. Each of those has systems by which they tell a generator what its fuel type is. So if it's a renewable resource, so they'll go down to say this is a wind resource, this is a solar resource, and then for every megawatt hour that they produce and put onto the grid, they give them a certificate, a renewable energy certificate or a REC, and then they can sell that to a purchaser that would then say, okay, the grid transmission owner has certified that this is from a renewable resource that qualifies, and you can purchase that certificate from the producer.
I mentioned aggregate. Many communities in the viewing area are on an aggregate system where communities have banded together and bought the electricity from a particular source. And there are certain things that aggregate or those communities should do, and one of those is to make sure that they look for a local clean energy carve-out. Can someone explain what a carve-out is?
Yeah, the carve-out, when we look at
Don't let the director do all the talking here, okay? It's okay for you guys to talk.
The carve-out would be what percentage you want to come from a renewable resource. It could be from a particular renewable resource, wind or solar. You could say we would like 100% of our electricity to come from a renewable resource, and some communities have done that. So carve-out is just saying what percentage. Under our current law, we have a renewable portfolio standard that if you're buying from default service from Ameren or Commonwealth Edison, we're going to have ever increasing percentages coming from renewable resources, all the way up to 25% from renewable resources. So it increases about a 1.5% per year. But if you go to a municipal aggregation scheme, the municipality has to dictate those terms when it goes out for bid. So unless a community says what percentage they want to come from renewable resources, there's no requirement that any bidder would have to put any renewable resource in that community. So a lot of communities aren't aware that they need to talk to their city officials and say, we would like more renewable resource to be in our municipal aggregation contract.
Can you explain a renewable energy credit to me? Is that something that somebody can explain?
Yeah, those RECs are just that 1 megawatt of electricity that goes on to the grid that they would supply, and that is kind of what we use as tradable permits to say, here's how much renewable resources gone onto the grid. Otherwise, we have no way of kind of tracking that once it goes out onto this interconnected grid.
So that's an offset to brown power.
That's right.
Or oil-fired brown power. So, so let's talk about benefits of wind farms. Can you tick off some of the benefits? I mean, obviously building jobs is one of them, construction.
Sure. I mean, as you just mentioned, offsetting non-sustainable forms of energy. So the potential to offset, coal-fired, natural gas-fired, various different forms of generation that do emit carbon into the atmosphere. So it's a direct offset for carbon-fired generation. That would be one of the largest. benefits to wind energy.
And I assume that most of these farms are in rural areas, or most of
Right.
these wind farms are in rural areas.
Yes, yeah.
So that now, do they lease the land and pay an annual fee?
Yes, yeah, and there are different forms that the lease payment will take, but it is an annual payment, usually for 20, 25 years, sometimes renewable after that.
We want to talk about some other aspects of renewable power. We've been talking about wind. Let's turn to solar. How viable is solar power in terms, because on the chart from when you get Ameren, Illinois, there's no solar power as a source. Is that possible that we might see solar power as a large source in the future?
Very doable. And then I think that is the kind of the current trend we're seeing around the nation. And then Illinois, in fact, is somehow behind as compared to other states. But in terms of wind resource and then the solar resource, Illinois does provide the kind of the very good wind resource as well as the solar resource. It's a kind of the interesting comparison. If you look at the kind of the summer, sometime, let's say in July, if you compare the kind of the July's solar radiation amount you're getting here in Peoria to the kind of the solar radiation you're getting in some place in Florida, like how would you guess? Like which place would give you more solar radiation potential?
My guess would be Florida.
Yeah, Florida. But like the surprising Peoria, you will get the kind of the more solar potential because of the variety of reason. Solar, like you have to have the kind of good solar radiation, but when you convert the kind of to solar radiation into electrical energy, there are multiple things like that you will have to consider, such as a kind of ratio between the kind of like the solar radiation to electricity, because of the kind of the Florida's humidity and then weather condition, like you might not get like that much electricity converted as compared to the kind of the Peoria weather condition. That's just like the one example. But of course, like the Florida will get you the kind of annual the electrical generation more than the kind of the Peoria. But the Illinois does provide the kind of the good amount of solar radiation throughout the year.
Now, there's a building at ISU that has solar panels on top.
That's right. We have two residential-sized renewable energy systems. We have one 2.4 kilowatt photovoltaic array on one of our classroom buildings, actually the room that the building that Dr. Joe works in. And we also have an off-grid, we call it a hybrid wind solar system. It's not connected to the grid. It's a rather small system. It's about a 1 kilowatt small wind turbine, and that's connected to a 1 kilowatt photovoltaic array as well. Basically, its primary purpose is to provide security lighting to a sort of public garden that we have near campus. And it's also for research purposes and for student involvement. We have students that come and do inspections and help with the operation and maintenance of the small system.
We've been talking about putting power onto the grid. There's another sustainable power, geothermal, really doesn't put anything onto the grid, but it does do a lot of heating. How well are we doing with geothermal?
We have a lot more potential, especially in central and southern Illinois, to install more geothermal systems. Like all renewable energy systems, the upfront cost can be daunting sometimes to homeowners, and so there is an additional cost to putting in geothermal, but it can really be very cost effective over the long run to put in a geothermal system for heating.
Do we dare talk about hydropower? Because only 1% of power comes from hydro, and that's, I assume, from Keokuk. The Ameren, Missouri runs a plant off the Mississippi River near Keokuk. Is there potential for more hydropower?
Yeah, we've done some modeling that would say that probably in the next 5 to 10 years, we could see run-of-river hydro. So these would be not our traditional, Hoover Dam, where we dam up a big river and run that. I think we've done building those type of hydroelectric plants, but we'd have the opportunity to put turbines in a river, allow the water to flow and generate electricity. We're not quite there yet in terms of making that cost effective, but with continued research, it looks likely in the next 5 to 10 years that would be economical for Illinois, some of our rivers.
I want to talk about what's happening at ISU in just a moment, but one more question about the grid. One of the items that you promote is by having sustainable power that's developed here and put on the grid, you save in transmission costs. Mm-hmm. Explain that to me.
Yeah, so it can actually go both ways. So depending on where your renewable energy resource is, you might have to build additional transmission. So we talked about Illinois having a very good wind resource, but we're not the best wind resource. If you went out to western Iowa or the Dakotas, they would have much higher sustained wind speeds. But the problem there is we don't have available transmission capacity, and we don't have a ready market to deliver that electricity to anybody who's going to consume it. So it means that we're going to have to build additional transmission capacity. So you have to figure that into the overall cost of the system. In Illinois, we have been blessed with having excess capacity in our transmission grid, so we didn't have to build new transmission capacity. So you looked at the transmission lines that are already crisscrossing the state, and you said, oh, this one's very near a high wind potential site. We can build the wind farm here and only have to go, a mile or so to the transmission grid, and it's already has the capacity built. So that's been a competitive advantage for Illinois.
So if I add something to what Dr. Loomis just said, renewable energy systems could be categorized into two, distributed generation as well as the kind of centralized generation. So the wind farms, those are the more of the kind of the centralized, the bigger utility scale system, and then distributed generation, for example, the kind of the smaller scale rooftop PV system, photovoltaic system. Distributed generations could be installed, and then that could minimize the kind of the transmission need, because they're generating the kind of electricity where they need the electricity, and then if they generate more than what you need, then it could go back to the grid.
Briefly, I want to address the Center for Renewable Energy also deals with students at Illinois State University.
That's right.
What is there a program where students actually graduate with a particular degree in renewable energy, or?
Yeah, we do have a renewable energy program. The renewable energy program is the nation's first interdisciplinary renewable energy program, because we are dealing with the technology associated with the variety of renewable energy systems, as well as we treat the energy system as the multidisciplinary problem, including the social economic problems as well.
And finally, there is a conference coming up July 16th. What is that conference called? What is it for?
It's called the Renewable Energy Conference. Is there?
Yeah, that's
the
name.
Original.
And it includes 5 tracks. I'll make sure I don't screw this up. Wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and energy efficiency. Did I get those right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So 5 breakout sessions during the day to focus on those 5 distinct areas. Mm-hmm. So, some people come to a conference and they're interested in one of those particular areas, so they'll have an opportunity to focus on one particular area that interests them.
And one real quickly, Dr. Loomis, we did not talk about energy efficiency. That's one of the components at the conference July 16th. That's where people actually can really do something themselves.
Yeah, it's very easy to do, so there'll be opportunities for them to learn about energy efficiency. We have in the state an energy efficiency portfolio standard, and we're looking at enhancing that to encourage homeowners to make more efficient use of the electricity that they consume.
And is the conference July 16th open to the public?
Yes, it is. So registrations are open. You can find that on the renewable energy websites, just renewableenergy.illinoisstate.edu, and there's the programs and the different tracks and speakers are listed there on the website.
Okay, let me say thank you to Matt Alderman, the Senior Energy Analyst for the Center for Renewable Energy, and to Dr. Jin Zhou, the Associate Director of the Center. Thank you both for being with us. And the Director of the Center for Renewable Energy at Illinois State University is Dr. David Loomis. So thank you all three for the conversation and the update on Illinois being the 5th largest wind power capacity in the country. And we'll be back next week with another edition of At Issue. This time we're going to be talking about potential cuts to services for people who have HIV and AIDS. And there is a new structure for serving those individuals. We'll be talking about that next time on At Issue. Please join us then.